And thank you for joining us for this webinar today on tips for reforecasting in turbulent times. All lines are currently on mute, and if you have any questions, please use the chat box and we will address these during our Q&A period at the end of the presentation. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Alan, who will begin the presentation.
Hi, and just a quick sound check. You can hear me okay still?
I can hear you okay.
All right, great. All right, so tips for reforecasting in turbulent times. Well, let's talk a little bit first as we get going here. A little bit about TrueSky and myself, just so you kind of know where we're coming from, so you kind of give some background of where this information is pulled from. About this presentation, what I'm going to give you is tips and tricks. I'm going to talk about both application and process. It will probably be heavily Excel focused. A lot of these tips and tricks, if you are using a forecasting application, will also apply. But again, most of you are probably using Excel at this point. So that is the focus. We will do Q&A, but up until that point, all of your phones are on mute. That's just, again, people working from home, kids, pets, everything else nowadays. So we'll keep those muted until the end, just to keep down the background noise. And then we'll handle questions. And the best way to handle those is through the GoToWebinar question box, where you can actually type in questions. If you are having problems hearing me or something like that, or if it looks like the screens aren't advancing, please put something into the chat or the question thing right away. Hopefully that we'll see what's going on and we can stop. So again, in case screens freeze or something like that. All right, so let's talk about, first of all, who's TrueSky, and then a little bit about me, just so you know what's going on here. So TrueSky, we are a software company. We design and develop and deploy a budgeting, forecasting, reporting, and analytical solution, a corporate performance management solution. And really what we're trying to do is allow you as a business to focus on the high value items that go along with doing a forecast, rather than all the drudgery that goes along with it, right? And we kind of help three different user groups within your organization. We help contributors, the people that are doing the frontline data input. We help reduce the time and effort it takes to get your numbers into the system. When it comes to the finance group, we're going to minimize all of your application processes and what it takes to do a budget and a forecast while increasing the quality. And when it comes to decision makers as a company, we help you provide meaningful information that's going to help you reduce risk and avoid surprises. And that's really what we do as an application. Now, again, this presentation is not about our application. It's a general one in nature, but I just want to kind of give you our background that we are all about budgeting, forecasting, reporting, and analytics. So it's kind of what we do, and that's kind of where a lot of this knowledge comes from. Now, who am I? Well, my name is Alan Whitehouse, and I am the Chief Software Architect at TrueSky. So I am the main focus of what kind of features go in based on customers and what they need from budgeting and forecasting point of view, right? I've been doing this now for 26 years, give or take. And I have worked in the business world with corporate performance management solutions, like what we're talking, like what I do today, business intelligence, as well as ERP. Now, in that world, I have worked with dozens of different industries. If there's an industry out there, I've probably touched it in one way, shape, or form. And I've also worked with a wide range of sizes of companies, from companies that are a few $100,000, a year in revenues, maybe small not-for-profits with, that kind of funding, up to, I think my largest client is somewhere upwards of about $5 billion in revenue. So I've got a wide gamut for the size of organizations I've worked with. And a lot of these things that we're going to talk about have been driven over these many years of working with these companies, improve their processes, and things that I see where things fall apart, and stuff that we've developed, with our clients to help them be a little bit more efficient and go forward, okay? So what I like to always start out with is kind of a question. Why do we do a forecast? Or why do we do a budget? And I'll use some of those terms interchangeably as we go throughout. The concepts are pretty much apply the same here. So if you hear me use budget versus forecast, you'll know what I'm talking about. So why do you do a forecast in your organization? Well, there's really a few reasons why you might have to do a forecast. Well, the first one I like to call it is because we have to. Now, I think most of you out there would agree that you don't like to have to do budgets and forecasts. If you could go the rest of your life without doing one, you probably would happily do so. But that's usually not an option. So because we have to, maybe you have a board of directors that you have to answer to that is looking for a forward-looking forecast. Maybe you have a bank that requires you to give them a forecast in order to keep things like lines of credit open. All right. Maybe you have some form of regulatory body that dictates that you have to give a forecast, whether that be yearly, quarterly, or monthly, whatever the case may be. So in reality, because we have to is a valid reason for why you do a forecast. What are some of the other reasons that you do a forecast? Well, another one of those is financial predictability. Okay. Maybe you are a manufacturer and you use a commodity item, sugar, as an example, right? Well, you're going to do a forecast to see potentially, maybe, you make candy, you need the sugar, right? You're going to do that forecast to kind of decide, since sugar is maybe your number one ingredient, when do we buy sugar? Do we buy it now and store it? Do we take a chance going further on? So you're using forecasts to help make business decisions that help, affect your bottom line. So for financial predictability. You do forecasts to understand the business drivers. So as an example, how many units do we need to warehouse this year? How many employees do we need on staff to meet our targets? Because again, those what drive your business. So if you don't do a forecast, and let's say you've got a lag time for hiring people or for getting product from overseas, you need to have that forecast so you can understand your business drivers and plan accordingly. And one of the final reasons people do forecasts is to help manage performance. Many of us are held accountable to budgets and forecasts, salespeople especially, right? So you do that to manage performance. So the reason you're doing forecasts today might be 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these reasons. But the reasons you do forecasts tomorrow may be one of these reasons instead of all 4. Or maybe a different combination of what you're doing. So the reason I start with this slide is that when you're going to talk about reforecasting and forecasting and budgeting, before you go into that cycle, whether it be the once a year, big budget, or the quarterly reforecast, or a rolling forecast on a monthly basis, each time before you start that process, I want you to think about, why are you doing this forecast? Because the answer that you give out of those 4 is going to drive what type of information you need to collect and who do you need to have involved in the process. I think too many companies go into and they just keep forecasting and forecasting over and over and over again using the same people, using the same input sheets that they've always used, and they're not taking into account the change in their business or the change around them. So again, if you're doing it because you have to, and it's only because you need to meet the bank's requirements, well, then you should really just be focusing on whatever the bank needs in order to do your budget and your forecast, okay? However, if you're using this to try to plan on how far into the future you need to buy product from overseas because there is a 8-week or 12-week lag from when you order it to when it gets put on a boat and when it's shipped over, then you really need to be driving down at the business drivers of your budget and forecast. And people tend to be too narrowly focused and keep doing it the way they're always doing it, and they're not getting the optimal information back out to drive their business forward. So before you start a process, take a moment to think about why you're doing it, what has changed from the last time in your business, and adjust accordingly. Now, when you're doing a forecast, there are some different elements that can affect the quality of your forecast. And the first of the big buckets I'm going to talk about is the people bucket. And that deals with involvement, accountability, and time. Now let's talk a little bit about those different subpoints there when it comes to dealing with people. So the first thing, when you're going to do a forecast, and now in this world where everything's topsy-turvy and we don't know, what closures are going to happen tomorrow versus next week, and when things are going to open up, and when supplies are going to be back on shelf, and so forth, right? You really need to think about changing what you're doing, and one of those things is the involvement of the people that you have. And when I say involvement, I'm not talking about physical involvement. I'm there putting numbers into the keyboard. What's more important when you're working with people, and especially when you start asking them to reforecast more often and do this more times, because the reality is no one likes doing forecasting. No one likes doing budgeting. A lot of your people that are working on it, they don't see an upside to it. They see downsides to it. You know, it takes time, it takes effort. I'm being held accountable to more stuff now, right? They don't see the benefits themselves personally, right? So when you're thinking about involvement, you have to think about ways not just to get them physically involved in working on the budget, but how do you get them mentally involved? And how, more importantly, how do you get them emotionally involved? Okay. So the mental involvement is how do you make sure they're actually giving it enough time, enough mental thought process, right? They're not just doing it while they've got kids screaming in the background and YouTube on their other screen, and you know they're typing in and going back and forth between doing emails, and but you know that mentally they're just too divided, right? So you have to work on ways to get them to be able to focus and finding time for them to work on it in a focused environment. But even more importantly, you have to get your people emotionally involved in the budget. You have to get them to understand and to care about your forecast and care that the numbers are as accurate as they can be, so they work on it the way it needs to be, okay? Now, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And again, you're gonna know your people better, but that's what you have to strive for, is that people, at the end of the day, they care about having good, accurate numbers. Part of what leads into that is the next bullet point, accountability. You'd be surprised by how many organizations I work with that at the end of the day, their people can put whatever numbers they want into the forecast, and it doesn't matter how wildly they're off. There is no accountability to the budget and the forecast. If you want quality numbers, you need to hold people accountable to those numbers. And how do you hold them accountable? Well, it's one of two schools of thought. It's either the carrot or the stick, as the old phrase goes. You either reward them for being accurate with their forecasts, or there needs to be a downside. There needs to be a negative consequence if they're not accurate. One of those two. And again, you know your people better, you know your corporate culture better, far better than I would ever assume to know. But at some point, your people need to be held accountable to the numbers that they put in. The next one is time. And this is really becoming critical now that organizations are having to do reforecasting more often. Up until a year ago, we were seeing a trend as our company where more and more companies were moving from the once a year big budget with maybe a kind of a mid-year reforecast. There was already a trend in place, and this is being driven by the market before COVID hit, of doing at least quarterly reforecasts, okay? But since everything changed in the world, and you know what our plan was, you know, for 3 months from now completely went out the window, more and more companies now see the fact that, you know, doing reforecasting on a quarterly basis is the minimum, and they need to be doing reforecasting every month, if at all possible, right? Because things are just too fluid in today's world. And if you want to keep your business going, you've got to be able to adjust. Now, you're asking your people to do a lot more work on that forecast. And to do that, they need time. Now, we're all in a world where things are not like what we were expected. You know, schedules are messed up, you know, whether it be school, shopping, all of that kind of stuff. Asking your people to spend more time doing the forecast, but also get all of their other work done is not realistic. And that's the kind of thing that builds resentment, because now they're working outside of business hours. They're giving up weekends, whatever the case may be. So if you want good quality budgets, when it comes time to do all these reforecasts, you got to find your people time. And how do you do that? Well, you find other people in the organization and you offload some of their work when it comes to forecasting, okay? And you're also gonna have to find ways to streamline the process. So you have to give your people more time. The next element, the next pillar of what goes into a budget is what I call the data pillar. And it really consists of, you know, details, drivers, external information, and timeliness. I'm gonna talk about all these. So level of detail. The first thing that I normally, when it comes to your mind, when I say what level of detail you're capturing and what would you like to capture, almost all of you probably immediately jump to saying we need to capture more detail. We need to capture more and more detail in the budget than we're capturing today. And right now, I'm going to say that's probably unrealistic, especially if you're going to get down to doing a rolling forecast in your organization. You just don't have the people and the time that it takes to do that. What I'm going to ask you to do is take a step back and think of it from a different point of view. I actually want you to capture less detail. But what I want you to do is find the detail that you need to capture that really drives your business. Kind of think the old 80-20 rule, where 20% of your customers are probably responsible for 80% of your revenue, or 20% of X is responsible for 80% of Y, that kind of rule of thumb, right? Doing forecasting is no different. You're going to have 20% of your items, whether that be customers, products, GL accounts, whatever, responsible for 80% of your revenue or your costs. Okay, I want you to just identify that 20%. That's what I want you to focus doing reforecasting on. And then do it really, 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 really well. So you're going to budget less detail, but you're going to budget it better. And the rest of the numbers you're just going to copy from last year, bump them up by 2%. You're going to, at the end of the day, you're going to get a better showing of your stuff. Now, drivers. What are the drivers of your business? Is it people? Is it units? Is it miles? Whatever the case may be. And I'm going to show you some examples why I want you to get away from just budgeting dollars and budgeting the drivers. So kind of table that for a while, then we're going to come back to it later on. And it's something very important. External information. You really need to push your people, especially when doing reforecast now, to take into account more and more of what's going on in the world around them and what they just normally did, right? Every day today with doing reforecasting, it's in upheaval. If you're not paying attention to what's going on with your suppliers, with your customers, and you're just budgeting based on last year, and you don't realize that your suppliers are now being squeezed by their suppliers because they can't get the supplies they need to make the supplies for you, you're not going to be able to forecast. So you need to get out of your bubble of what you've always done and kind of look broader for the amount of information that you're going to take when thinking about the budget. And now when it comes to the next one is timeliness. Not to be confused with time. Timeliness is how up to date are your numbers. If you're going to start to survive in this new world where you're going to have to reforecast on and spin on a dime, you need to be able to do this and turn this budget around in a short order. You can no longer do a 6-week, 8-week budget cycle. If you're going to do monthly forecasting, you're down to a 2 or 3 day budget cycle, forecasting cycle, a 2-day kind of thing, because otherwise it just takes up too much of your people's time. So how are you going to accomplish that? Well, a little bit is you're going to start budgeting less, like I talked about in the details. You're going to look at more internal information, and you're going to focus on just what's critical. And you're going to put some things into play that's going to help automate this process. I'll talk a little bit about those as we go along. Then let's talk a little bit about some of the process issues. And those are kind of made up of some of these areas here: accessibility, security, visibility, confidence, duration, and frequency. Accessibility is probably something you've all dealt with over the last 6-8 months. Okay, you had systems that were primarily accessed when people were working in your office at their desk, and now that they had to work from home, they couldn't access those systems. I know a lot of companies that were left scrambling. So you need to make sure that going forward, you reforecast more regularly, and in today's uncertain environment, that whatever tools you're using, whether it be Excel or an application or your ERP package, whatever the case may be, is accessible 7/24 to your people. Because again, we're all working weird schedules, we're working weird times, we're working weird locations. It all needs to be accessible. Security. Again, not going to go heavy into this in this presentation. We have some other ones that we talk more about this. But the first thing that also comes to mind when I say security is you're worried about, are our numbers secure enough? And that's always a good thing to be worried about. But often what I've seen lately is organizations who have their numbers too secure, that are tightening things down too much and actually not giving enough information to the people that are working on the budget and the forecast. Like, you can only see your department's numbers. You can't see another's department's numbers. Well, there is an advantage to sharing some of this information because you can take advantage of shared knowledge. So as you're going forward, make sure your numbers aren't too secure as you go forward. I'm not going to talk about visibility and confidence right now in this presentation. That deals with knowing where things are at in the budget cycle and how confident are you in your numbers. But the other ones we're talking about are really important. Duration and frequency. Kind of goes along with timeliness, as I was talking about earlier. Duration. if you're going to start reforecasting on a regular basis, whether that be quarterly or ideally monthly, you can't have a process that goes 8 weeks, right? You got to streamline it. You got to be able to get your people in and out. And again, only focusing on what you really need to focus. And that may change from month to month or quarter to quarter, but you need to put things in place that gets them in and out. So you need to be able to start doing that turnaround budget if you're going to do monthly, in a day, in 2 days kind of things. Maybe they have a week to work on it, but it's got to be done by a certain date, right? And frequency, again, if you think you can get by with only doing a once a year budget, you're going to start feeling that more and more going forward. You've got to be moving towards quarterly and even yearly. So where you can, where things fall down in any of these different areas, it ends up affecting the accuracy of all of your numbers, right? So these are all the things that you have to think about in order to get really good, high quality type numbers. So why do you want to be reforecasting today? Well, obviously, I think some of this is probably, understood, automatically, but let me review it anyhow. You need to make sure you've got your business in alignment with what's going on in the world around you, right? There are companies that have had to switch. If you're a restaurant right now and you're in an area where they've shut down indoor dining, right? You have to adjust your business and you have to do a realignment. And what does that mean? Same thing for allocation of resources, right? As an organization, right? Maybe you don't need as many cashiers at the front thing, but you need more people to deliver. Again, alignment of your resources and allocation of your resources. Again, the reforecast is going to help hold people accountable to the changing world, and it's going to help you adapt to change going out there. So as we go through this, I'm going to talk about different people, process, and data issues as we're going through it. So if I go back to this screen, right, I'm going to give you some more examples in concrete in all of these different areas of how you can reforecast better and some of the things to look out for, right? Because stuff that you can deal with that's going suboptimal in a once a year budget cycle, you're going to have to get better at if you're going to do it quarterly or monthly. So let's talk a little bit about some of the different people issues. And I'm going to bring them all up at screen. And I'm going to talk about these one at a time as we go through it. Well, one of the biggest thing is, as you start to adjust how you're doing budgeting and forecasting, and if you remember my first slide, where we talk about why you're doing a forecast, and talking about narrowing it down to just the things that are important, you may be getting more people or different people involved in the budgeting and forecasting process. Problem with that is you're going to get an increase in what I call problem children, okay? As you get more people involved, you're going to find that you're going to have a wider range of skills. So if you are using Excel as your primary tool, which is odds are you are, you're going to have people that can sit down at a spreadsheet and they can do magic with it. And you're going to have people on the other end of that spectrum that freak out just by thinking of having to open up Excel, okay? So you're going to have to make sure that you put processes and training in place to help deal with that. But as you add more people, you're also going to get two other things that are going to go along with it. First of all, everyone's going to want it their way, right? And the problem is if you let everyone budget and forecast their way, it's going to increase your problems of trying to aggregate these budgets into your master budget, by 10-fold or 100-fold, right? So you can't let everyone do it their own way and do budgeting and all of your roll-ups and analytics in a timely manner. So you have to standardize on your process, and that's going to be a battle that sometimes you're going to have to fight with different people. Also, as you add more and different people in there, you will always find people that are unable to deliver on time. So if you're trying to get to quarterly or even monthly reforecasting, people have to be done when it's done, because if you got to get that report to the bank, banks aren't always very understanding about when you have to deliver stuff. Same thing for regulatory bodies and so forth. Now, I wish I had a magic solution on how you get people to deliver on time, because there are always people that are chronically late. The best answer I'm able to give is you treat them like I do my teenagers. So if I know we have to be out the door at 5 p.m. to get wherever we need to be, in time, I tend to fudge with the kids and tell them, oh, by the way, we have to be out the door by 4:45, because I know in their mind, if I say 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock means I'm going to start putting on my jacket and my shoes, and then we're late. So you kind of fudge when it's due. So that's the best answer I can give you. I would love if people have other solutions to how you get those people that are unable to deliver on time, how to deliver on time, because I would love to find something better than the answer I just gave you. Other issues that you need to face when you're getting more people involved and all of this on the people side. Security concerns, right? You need to start thinking about who's going to receive access and why. And then I'm going to go back to that other point. Is your data secure enough? And is it too secure, right? I see a lot of benefits with letting people collaborate on the budget across departments, across business units, across product lines, locations, whatever your different dimensions are there, right? And sharing that knowledge, because different people have different points of view. Maybe somebody who is in manufacturing might have a different point of view of somebody that is, say, in HR or IT doesn't, right? And those different points of view can sometimes get people thinking differently and help improve the quality, overall quality of your numbers. So I like this whole concept of not locking down everything. Obviously, there's stuff that you want to lock down, you know, compensation numbers, like who's, you know, how much your coworkers are making and so forth, right? But don't lock it down so much that people can't help share that knowledge and share ways to go, right? Biggest one as you start to reforecast and you do it more often is going to be this loss of work time, okay? Biggest complaint you're going to get and the biggest headache you're going to have, right? Just because somebody has to do a forecast, their day-to-day job doesn't change. They still have to get whatever else they're tasked with doing done. And that leaves them say, when do I have time? And you expect me to work on this on Saturday? You want me to work on this after hours? That builds resentment. So as you move to this reforecasting more and more often, this is probably your number one thing that you have to worry about and you have to put into place to deal with. You have to think about building forecasting as part of that person's job description. And you have to think about how many tasks you give that person through the course of a month or however often you're doing it to take into account that extra work that now you're doing it. Too many companies don't do that. They just start reforecasting more and they're dumping more work on their people without any solution. That builds stress, that builds resentment, that builds people quitting, that builds people doing a half-assed job and not getting very good numbers, okay? So this is the biggest thing that you have to focus on, is helping them with this. And again, you can do that by offloading some of their duties, by changing, you know, priorities and so forth with them. So do not underestimate this as an issue. And then the final thing that, again, is you're going to deal with a lot of your people as you're going through is that ownership of the numbers. You know, if you've ever heard, hey, I don't know where those numbers came from. Those aren't my numbers. Somebody must have changed those, right? Those are the kind of things that are going to happen more often as you do budgeting more and more often, especially if you have multiple people touching the same set of numbers, right? So you need to put in processes in place to deal with that. My biggest recommendation on that is you only ever let the frontline people edit numbers. In upper management only gets to review numbers. They don't ever edit numbers. If they don't like the numbers, they send them back to the frontline people to change the numbers with explanations why. That way people are always on the same page, and it helps eliminate some of those ownership issues. But then let's focus a little bit about some of the data issues that you're going to face going forward. So as you're doing more and more forecasts, as you're doing, you know, changing the world, you're probably going to be budgeting and forecasting against different things than you were currently, right? Depending on your business and your business model, you may be having to spend, as an example here, more time doing things on compensation or more time on capital expenditures and a traditional kind of financial or a sales forecast, okay? So now you've increased your complexity. You have more moving parts. You have different things that you have to align. So you're going to have to plan for this. And again, it's a different mindset. If I'm budgeting budgeting compensation is a different mindset thought process than me budgeting customer revenue, as an example. Two different things. So you kind of have to take this into account, your complexity and who's working on it and so forth. Now, as you're going forward, we're going to talk a little bit about different capture. You know, are we capturing dollars? Are we capturing drivers? What have you, right? And I'm going to give you some more examples about this as to why it's important. But again, when you're going forward, start capturing the drivers, not the dollars, okay? And in Excel, it's very easy to do, but that gives you what you need to do as you go forward. It adds some complexity, but again, at the end of the day, you're going to have better quality numbers. Again, you're going to be reforecasting more often now, okay? You're going to have version control issues if you continue to use Excel. This is one of the areas where A good naming conventions and all stuff makes sense. One of the other areas where a budgeting application really helps you out. You know, if you've got all of these different versions, it's very easy to get confused. Who's working with the current version of the budget? Is this version 1? Is it version 2? Is it version 3? You can't trust the save date, you know, that you see in File Manager, right? Because that's, somebody opens it up and hits save, that resets, right? So you're gonna have to really get your head around version control and working with that, so be prepared for that. Again, now you're doing more versions, you've got different complexity, you've got more interlinking worksheets, you're gonna get more broken links. You know, with that hash, you know, it's # RAF pound value, or, you know, now hashtag, I guess is how we're calling it, right? That's something that you have to be prepared for. It's gonna take more time to cycle it back. Again, one of the other areas where a budgeting application will help you, but just be aware that that's one of the things you're gonna have to spend more time troubleshooting in Excel. And obviously, all together throughout this, you're doing budgeting and forecasting more often. You're gonna have more sharing of documents. You're gonna have to store it more. You have to make sure that you've got better backups, that all of this stuff's getting backed up in case of disaster, right? That you've got better documentation. These are all the data issues that you're gonna face as you go forward and as you do things more and more often. So if you think things like the broken linkages are bad today doing a budget once a year, that's gonna be 12 times as bad when you're doing it 12 times a year. If you start adding in detailed compensation planning where you haven't done it, you know, before, now it's 12 times as bad times another 10 times as bad, right? Because you've got more processes. So these are all the things that you have to think about and be prepared for as you're dealing with doing reforecasting on a more common basis. Now, some of the process issues that you're gonna face, especially as you're getting new people involved, they haven't been involved in the budgeting forecasting more often, but now you need them because that's a area your business has changed, right? Keeping your people focused. People sometimes focus too much on the what and not the why. At the end of the day, a good forecast is all about the why, not the what. Doesn't necessarily mean that sales this year are 1.2 million, where last year they were 1 million. I think what's more important is you know the why. Why are our sales going up? Why are our sales going down? If you don't know the why, you have no idea if the what is accurate or not. Okay, hope that makes sense. I can put in sales of, last year our sales were $1 million, and now I put in a line for $10 million, right? Great, you're thinking, hey, great, now we got sales, $10 million, that's awesome. But why are we able to go from 1 million to 10 million in 1 year? If that's not clear to you, then there's a reason to question that $10 million. So really make sure your people focus a lot on the why and not the what. And again, that's tough for people to do. It's very easy for them to get their head around the numbers, not the reason behind the numbers. Now, you're also going to see your cycle time start to increase. You know, you have to do more managing, more time running the process and everything else. So you're going to have to be prepared for that. You're going to have to shrink down your cycle times if you're going to reforecast more often. And as you're doing more and more type of budgeting and forecasting, you got to have somebody in charge of it. One person who controls overall. Now, there may be different people in charge of different sub areas like compensation, financial, revenue, but at the end of the day, you have to have one person that has ownership of everything to make sure everything is in alignment. Well, what are some of the things that you can do to implement some process change? And I'm going to show you some other concrete tips and tricks as we go forward. First of all, as you're getting more and more people doing budgeting more often, different people, make sure you give more guidance. Give people their goals, spell them out clearly, give them their warnings, all of that kind of stuff. You know, what's going on within the organization, okay? So there's a lot of different ways to do that. You know, one of the things that I like to do is as simple as that. Make sure in your Excel workbook, your first tab tells them what they need to do. When's it due? What are the goals? What are your targets? Keep it out of email. We all get way too much email nowadays, and it gets lost in the shuffle. Put it here, okay? Other things that you want to think about as you're getting more and more people involved, you're doing it more often. Put in processes that help facilitate communication. This is one of the other things that's happened a lot in businesses today when you got more people working remote and everything else. You need to look at and I think what really helps is deploying some type of group communication platform. There's a lot of them out there. You may have heard of Slack, you may have heard of Teams, you may have heard of Yammer. Those are all different products that are out there. I'm not going to give a recommendation one over the other. You know, I know what we use, which is Teams, but that was a choice for a whole lot of reasons, not that it's necessarily better than one of the others that are out there. But what this allows you to do is have things like discussion boards, shared knowledge, get everything out of those emails, have that group shared information back and forth, because if one person has a question, odds are everyone else has it as well. Okay. Make sure that you're promoting accountability, that budgets matter, and that people own the numbers, right? If you don't have that, then there's really no point in doing a budget and a forecast, because again, at the end of the day, the numbers are just guesses. Get more people involved whenever possible. If you can get more people involved, right, you're going to have better quality numbers. You're going to have that, you're going to have more people, you know, better insights. You're going to spread that workload. So get more people involved. And don't forget about giving people time. At the end of the day, they need that time to work on the budget and the forecast. Other things that you want to think about as you're reforecasting more often. And now, again, I'm going to go on all these a little bit more. Make sure you keep it simple, okay? Don't try to boil the ocean with your forecast, right? As simple as you can make it for the people, it's going to be higher quality numbers. Go back to that 80-20 rule. Find those items that are material to your business. Every GL account that you budget for does not make a difference to your business. Every customer that you budget for at the end of the day does not make a difference to your business at the end of the day in the big picture. You have customers that do so little business with you, it doesn't matter. You have GL accounts that have such small impact on your bottom line, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You could be off by a factor of 10 and they don't matter, okay? So find those items that do matter and focus on them. So focus less on everything else, but do deeper dives into the stuff that matters. While we're talking about keep it simple, I'm gonna give you an example of a workbook that I got from a company that we were working with, God, almost 10 years ago, I guess, something along those lines. But I use it as an example because it still holds true, because I see this kind of thing constantly. What you're seeing on screen is an actual input sheet for a budget, right? Now, this company was doing it quarterly. They weren't budgeting on a monthly basis. They were just budgeting quarterly, but they were going out a few years on their budget. And you can see, again, we've got some color shading that's a little bit confusing at times, but it's not too bad, right? I've got the quarters on the columns, doing the sides. I've got some groupings of what I want to do with. And yes, some of those colors meant a little bit, but it wasn't super clear. Now I'm looking at this at 100%. The problem is, to actually complete their budget, this was the worksheet that people had to fill out. That is a zoom out to 12% to see everything on one line. I guarantee you, by the time the person was all the way over to the right, they've forgotten what they put in on the left. By they're all the way down to the bottom, they've forgotten what they put up in the top. I guarantee a ton of time was spent scrolling up and down, left and right. That was just lost, wasted time, confusion. That all affects the quality of the numbers. So when I talk about keep it simple, keep it simple. Focus on what is important in your organization. So here's one example of when I talk about keep it simple, right here. Keep it clean for your people, right? So up on the top of this example, again, do whatever you want, but this is just kind of stuff how I lay things out, right? They know exactly what the title, what is the kind of budget that you're doing? This is office expenses. For what department, for what location, okay? It's right there in their face. They know exactly what this worksheet's all about. Down the side, I've got my accounts. I've limited how much information I'm doing at one time. You know, we're doing quarterly here, so I'm just showing them 3 months, right? Very clear in my coloring. The blue-gray is read-only. Those are actuals or variants. The yellow is where they're supposed to input. They know exactly what they need to do. I've used some of the Excel visual indicators in order to give them some feedback that their numbers are too high or too low. So they know right away how they're doing. I've also kept it one screen wide, okay? Every time people have to move the mouse and scroll left or right and get it off of the screen, it takes time. They lose what they're wanting. So by using one screen wide, they can use the little scroll wheel on their mouse and just scroll up and down. Again, keep it simple for your people. You will get higher quality data. Then we talk about the 80-20 rule. This is a perfect example. And I'm going to highlight the line postage here. So we're talking about a budget that's about $2 million a month in expenses, give or take, all right? Yet they're asking for me to budget for a line for postage. That's about $2,000 a month, okay? That's a waste of everybody's time. That $2,000 on a $2 million budget is immaterial. It's nothing, right? Spending time trying to budget for it is a waste of everybody's time. That number could be 10 times higher and it's still not material. It has to almost get 100 times higher before it hits a material threshold. 50 times higher, you know, it hits material threshold maybe, right? So spending time budgeting that, and more importantly, spending time debating whether or not your postage line is going to be $2,000 or $3,000, just waste everyone's time. Okay, so if you're going to reforecast more often, you got to cut out this kind of stuff. But yes, you want a comprehensive budget. So what do? Well, you just copy last year's numbers and bump them up by 2%, 5%, whatever the case may be, and call it a day. Because again, it doesn't matter if it's 5% increase or 10% increase, it's still not material. So that's one of the other things that I want you to look at. Other things that are be more and more critical as you're budgeting is you got to stop the what I call the divide by 12 method of forecasting. That's where you take what you think you're going to spend for the year or what you're going to make for the year and just divide it equally. Because in reality, there are almost zero, with the exception of maybe expenses and revenue or insurance and rent kind of thing, where your revenue or your cost are identical month to month to month to month. Now, where this comes into play and where it's important is if you're trying to get to a cash flow forecast, which I know a lot of companies are. I mean, our requests for helping with cash flow planning have gone through the roof over the last months because, again, cash flow was so important these last few months, right? So up on the screen, I'm showing you a concept of why divide by 12 is not important, or divide by 12, you know, is a bad way to go. If you look at my original budget, my total is 1,200 items. It could be 1,200 units, could be $1,200, could be $12 million, whatever the case may be there, right? And then the red shows my actuals, which also equates to the same 1,200 items, okay? Let's say this is salary expense or revenue, right? And you're a ski resort where, again, you have higher things in the winter months and lower in the summer, right? If you go with the divide by 12, yes, at the end of the year, your budget works out the same. But if you're using this to drive to a cash flow forecast and are trying to work, are we gonna have enough to cover payroll? You know, if your expenses are up here and you were expecting them down here, well, you may not have enough to cover payroll. So you've got to really start getting rid of this whole divide by 12 when you're gonna do the reforecast. And again, budget less and this becomes easier to do. The other thing I want you to start doing is stop budgeting dollars and start budgeting the drivers. And here's an example I'm gonna give you. So example one, we predict $5 million in sales. Same thing in example two. Salespeople are predicting $5 million in sales. Traditionally, you sell at $10,000 per unit price. But in our second example, what you don't know going on in their minds is that they're going to drop the sales price to $2,500 per unit. Well, if you hit your 5 million in sales with my first example, that means you've got 500 units to build, warehouse, and ship. However, in the second example, that means you've got 2,000 units to build, warehouse, and ship, which gives you 4 times the volume. Now, still hit the same revenue, but let's say you're the one that has to bring in your products because you're a manufacturer from overseas and you have a lag time. Well, you need to know how many more units because you have to increase your number of purchases. And you need to spread those purchases out over the course of the year. Or you need to get more warehouse space, more floor space, more production lines in order to hit these numbers. So not knowing the drivers and just budgeting the dollars gives you a false sense of where you're at. And again, when so many things are topsy-turvy in the world, you have to know this level of detail to plan accordingly. Now, what are some of the ways that you can do to help you out implementing existing tools that you already have? So this is a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about that's really Excel based. One of those, keep in mind, get everything out of email. Email is not storage. Centralize your storage, okay? If everything I'm working on in Excel is stored in email and I go out sick, right? Or I'm on leave, right? Whatever the case may be, no one else can see those numbers, right? It's stuck in email, right? So centralize your storage, do shared drives, do a technology like a SharePoint or, whatever your cloud-based solution is, but also make sure it's getting backed up. That's the other thing. Just don't rely on the fact that you put a shared drive out there that it's getting backed up, because you don't want to lose everything. When you want to tie your data together, make sure you link to your workbooks, link to your data sources, and avoid copy paste. Now, we have a whole other white paper that you can request at the end of this that talks about some ways that you can tie into your data source directly and how you can better link workbooks and try to reduce the number of problems that you have. But that's something that you want to take into account. If you're interested in that, when you end the webinar, just ask for a copy of it and we can get that out to you. Make sure you spend time password protecting things. So you lock down the different worksheets, you lock down the formulas, you lock down the cells that you don't want people changing. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time chasing those hash ref, hash, value errors and so forth. And at the end of the night, put in some data validations in Excel and capture better data up front. One of the things a lot of people don't realize that Excel can do is allow you to put in data validations while people are doing data input, okay? So one of the things that you can do is when people are putting in numbers, you can actually put in validation when they type it in. So maybe what's a range of reasonableness for your numbers, right? All of a sudden, last year's sales were 5 million and we know the upper limit would be 8. Well, you can put in a rule that says if it's greater than 8 to give people a warning. So again, you can capture some of these errors up front. All right. One of the other things that you might want to think about at the end of the day is invest in a dedicated tool, right? So either invest in a dedicated tool or invest in training. So in Excel, invest in some advanced training, okay? There's a lot of that out there. And there's also a tool that's called Excel Inquire. And I don't have a presentation for that today, but if you do a Google search of Excel Inquire, it's going to show you some amazing things that it can do. Or look at an application like TrueSky. We help you do budgeting, planning, forecasting, reporting, analysis, and dashboarding. And it takes away a lot of the pains that you've talked about right now. I know I'm not, talking about our application here, but I just want to know that as you get to a certain point, you're going to have to get out of Excel. Otherwise, you're going to go insane probably. Now, a little bit of word on Excel Inquire. It is an incredibly useful tool, and it allows you to see all the different relationships between different workbooks, worksheets, and all of their cells. It's great for tracing formulas across workbooks and comparing different versions of workbooks. And it's actually a free add-on. So go ahead and Google Excel Inquire. You'll find a lot of great videos out there about how to use it, how do you set it up, and so forth. But it's really going to be a great tool for you to work with. Okay, so that's just one of those other things that you should look at to help you with all things related to Excel. So with that, that kind of ends my presentation. I hope you found a little bit of knowledge about this. We do have a kind of a white paper and another presentation that goes along with this that goes into more tips and tricks and so forth. So really up on screen is our contact information. If you would like some more information, you can also contact anyone at BASS. They will be more than happy to get you some more information about TrueSky and anything else that you want to do in this whole world. I do thank you for taking time out of your day to see our presentation and listen a little bit about it. Again, I hope you found it was helpful. Now, I will be here for some questions. So if you do have some questions, you can type them into the GoToWebinar question bar, and we will do our best to handle them. And if not, you can drop off and get a few minutes back out of your day.
So I do have a couple questions that have come in here. And like Alan mentioned, if you have any, type them in within the chat box or the question box. So the first question I have is, how much detail should we include in a budget or reforecast?
Good question. That is a kind of, it's a wide open question about how much detail, right? Every business is a little bit different. I think in today's world, and I hate using that phrase and I try not to, but I think it's true right now. there's a lot going on, and there's so many different moving parts to the world right now. So the level of detail today is, I think, smaller than it used to be, because you don't have the luxury of thinking about all this. You have to be really nimble. You have to be able to move quickly. So for that level of detail, it really does come back to that 80-20 or even less than that. I think it really is focusing on those 5-6 items that are the major drivers of your business, those 5-6 customers, those 5-6 products, those 5-6 accounts or expense categories or whatever the case may be. And that's where you spend your time. And you deep dive into all of those, and you find out how you either maximize if it's on the revenue side, or you minimize if it's on the cost side, those items, okay? And you work on those, because those are going to have the biggest effect on your bottom line, and you just let the rest of it kind of flow through in the wash. That's the best answer I can give at this point.
And the other question I have here is, what advice would you give to an organization looking to do their first reforecast?
Okay, so a lot of it's the same as everything else. So first of all, let's say you've only been doing the once a year big budget, and now you started getting into the reforecasting. So the first thing is, you got to give the people that are going to work on it the heads up, right? No one's going to want to be surprised out of the blue that, oh, by the way, we're going to start reforecasting now, and you weren't expecting it. So that's the first level, is to explain to everyone in your organization why you're doing reforecasting, why you're moving to it, why it's important, why they need to spend time on it, and so forth. The second step is to start at the same time putting in plans into place as how you're going to give your people time, kind of like I've talked about in the past. Then when it comes to that first reforecast, then it's going to be taking your last budget, and that's probably a good starting point, is comparing your last full budget to what your actuals are, and looking at what are the areas that are big drivers of your business, but at the same time, what were the areas that you were really, really off on? So you kind of want to pick those items that are the big drivers of your business and the items that you were wildly off on, whether too high or too low. And that's your starting point for the new budget. And then the next time, you're going to kind of do the same thing. You're going to compare those items that are the big drivers of your business and those items that you were wildly off on. And then you'll just focus on the items that you're, again, over the course of time, you'll get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And that'd be the best way to get started on that. Again, if it's the first time you do a reforecast, don't try to do the whole budget. It's not going to work out well. You kind of got to ease into it, I guess, would be the best way to think about it.
So it does look like that's all the questions that have come in. So with that being said, I would just like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy days to attend, as well as Alan for presenting. Everyone who has registered will be receiving a recording of the webinar via email, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.